The plot centers on a young New York constable named Ichabod who believes in progressive investigative methods and tries to use scientific knowledge and deductive methods to solve crimes. His approach irritates the conservative police leadership, and as punishment Ichabod is sent to a remote village called Sleepy Hollow, where a series of mysterious murders have occurred. 3 locals have been found decapitated, and town officials claim that the culprit is the ghost of a headless horseman. Upon arriving in Sleepy Hollow, Ichabod notices that the atmosphere in the village is dark and frightening. The people here are frightened and agitated. He meets several influential villagers including Balthazar Van Tassel and his wife Master Phillips, Dr. Lancaster, and several others. They tell him of a legend connected with the headless horseman. According to the legend, this horseman was a brutal German mercenary who fought for the British during the American Revolution. His hallmark was his love of death and destruction, and he fought like the devil, sparing neither himself nor others. But one day he was caught in the woods and beheaded with his own sword. People buried him in the forest and put his sword in his hands so that he could not do evil anymore. However, legend has it that someone opened his grave and stole the writer's skull, after which he rose from the dead to reclaim his head and take revenge. But according to rumor, someone dug open his grave and took the writer's skull, after which he rose from the dead to get revenge and get his head back. Ichabod is skeptical of these stories and decides to investigate the case scientifically. He finds traces of blood at the crime scenes and begins collecting evidence. During his investigation he meets a young woman named Catherine Van Tassel, the daughter of Balthazar, who lives in the village. A mutual sympathy develops between them, and Catherine begins to help Ichabod in his investigation. Soon, however, Ichabod himself comes face to face with horror. He witnesses the appearance of the headless horseman, who kills another man, and realizes that it is not just fiction. Ichabod then changes his attitude and begins to investigate the supernatural aspects of what is going on. He finds an old witch living in the forest who tells him that the horseman can be controlled by possessing his skull. The witch also predicts that the horseman will return to kill the one who summoned him from the grave. Meanwhile, Ichabod discovers that all the victims are somehow connected. He finds an old map that shows where the horseman was buried and goes there to find his grave. At the burial site, Ichabod sees that the writer's grave has indeed been dug up, but the skull is missing. He examines the remains and finds evidence that the theft of the skull was recent. At this point he comes to the realization that the horseman can only be summoned by someone who possesses his skull and uses it for his own purposes. This discovery becomes a key point in the investigation. He returns to the village to tell of his findings, but is confronted with a new round of brutal murders. The horseman comes again in the night and kills several people, and Ichabod realizes that time is running out. In his investigation, Ichabod uncovers several dark secrets of the village. He learns that all the victims are somehow connected to the Van Garretts, one of the village's wealthy families. He also finds documents revealing old Van Garrett's will, in which he left his entire fortune to a poor woman who had recently died. Ichabod begins to suspect that there is a struggle for power and money in the village, and that someone is trying to use the writer to eliminate his rivals and get his inheritance. He discovers that the horseman's skull was in the hands of Catherine's stepmother, Lady Marian. It turns out that she was the real brains behind all these murders. Ichabod learns the truth that Lady Van Tassel was a girl from a poor family who lost everything to the Van Garretts. Her mother was the same witch Ichabod met in the woods. Lady Van Tassel grew up obsessed with revenge and learned how to summon the horseman when she found his skull. She used the horseman to kill everyone who stood in her way of wealth and power. Now that Ichabod has learned the truth, Lady Van Tassel decides to kill him and Catherine to eliminate all witnesses. She summons a horseman and he begins to pursue Ichabod and Catherine. They run into the forest, but the horseman catches up with them. At the last second, Ichabod manages to take the horseman's skull from Lady Van Tassel's hands and throw it to the horseman. The skull fuses with the writer's body, and the writer regains his head and becomes whole. He stops obeying Lady Van Tassel and decides to take her to hell with him. The horseman grabs Lady Van Tassel and takes her with him to his underworld, leaving Ichabod and Catherine alive. After these events, Ichabod realizes that science cannot explain all the mysteries of the world and that there are forces in the world that are beyond human comprehension. He returns to New York with Catherine, determined to put the past behind him and start a new life.